It was the kind of night that seeps under your skin, windless, cold, and too quiet for comfort. October in northeastern Bergen County had a way of settling into your bones, and that evening was no different. I was behind the wheel of my cruiser, drifting through a familiar grid of suburban streets, just starting my overnight shift. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. Until it did. At exactly 10:48 p.m., a call crackled through dispatch, a disturbance on Ridgebrook Lane. A neighbor had reported hearing a scream, a woman's voice, sharp and panicked. No follow-up. No response from the house. Just a scream swallowed by silence. I'd been on the force for 2 years at that point. My name's Jake Mercer. And I'd come to learn that the worst calls are the ones that sound routine. A scream in the night? 9 times out of 10, it's a domestic argument or a loud TV. But that one remaining call, that's the one you never forget. When I arrived at the address, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. The lights were off. The house looked asleep. But the dark blue Toyota Sienna in the driveway said someone was home. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. That's when a man emerged from across the street, flannel robe, flashlight in hand, his voice tight with concern. He'd heard the scream, too. He said the woman who lived there, Dana, usually kept to herself. Lived alone. Sometimes her boyfriend visited, but it had been quiet lately. I could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just a neighbor being nosy. He was scared. I circled the house, checking doors and windows. Every one of them locked. Except for one, a rear window, pushed up halfway like someone had climbed through. My stomach turned. I called for backup and waited for confirmation. But I didn't wait to act. Something inside told me there wasn't time. Climbing through that window felt like stepping into a vacuum. The silence inside the house was absolute. I moved quickly but methodically, turning on lights as I went, kitchen, dining room, hallway. Everything in its place. Too neat. Too still. Dana. I called. Police. Are you alright? No answer. I cleared the first floor in under 2 minutes. Then I stood at the base of the stairs, staring upward into the shadows above. My training told me to wait for backup. But instinct told me something else. I remembered something one of my instructors had once said, when the moment comes, hesitation kills. So I moved. I unlocked the front door for the incoming units, then started up the stairs. Each step felt like crossing into deeper water. The carpeted hallway had 4 doors. I opened the first, an office. Empty. The second, a guest room. Nothing. The third door creaked as I opened it. It was the master bedroom. The hallway light cast a dim glow over the bed. Someone was lying under the covers, still, back turned toward me. My voice caught in my throat. Dana. I approached slowly. Her hair was matted. Her breathing shallow. That's when I saw the dark stains seeping through the comforter. Blood. I ripped back the blankets. She had been stabbed. Multiple wounds across her torso and side. Her skin was cold, but she was alive. Barely. Dispatch, I have a stabbing victim. Still breathing. Requesting immediate medical and unit support. As I relayed the information, I froze. The scream. The locked windows. Her state. She didn't make that sound. Someone else had been in the house. I pivoted on instinct, scanning the room. The closet was ajar. I flung it open, empty, then I got down on one knee. That's when I saw him, a man. Mask over the lower half of his face. Eyes wide. Curled beneath the bed like an animal waiting to pounce, I pointed my weapon. Show me your hands. He complied slowly, rising from beneath the bed with eerie calm. No weapon in hand, not yet. I ordered him into the corner, keeping my gun on him until backup rushed through the door. The man was cuffed without incident. He didn't say a word. Just stared. Later, we'd learn it was Dana's boyfriend. He'd found out about another man, a friend of his, and something in him had snapped. He broke in while she was asleep. Stabbed her 6 times. Then he waited. Maybe he wanted to flee. Maybe he planned to finish the job. She survived. She fought through the trauma, months of recovery, and even wrote me a letter. In it, she talked about her journey, about speaking out against domestic violence, about choosing to reclaim her life. She ended with a line that still echoes in my memory: "I couldn't scream again after that night. But somehow, you heard me." That night changed how I look at the silence. It taught me that not all monsters kick down doors or shout threats. Some crawl through windows. Some wait in the dark. And sometimes, the only thing standing between life and death is the decision to act, and that's why I still walk into the unknown. Because when the silence is too loud, someone has to listen. It was just past 2 a.m. when the radio crackled to life with a call that didn't sound like much on the surface: water pouring out from an apartment, no answer from the resident. Garden Grove Apartments wasn't a place that usually made noise. It was an aging, modest complex on the edge of northeastern Bergen County where residents mostly kept to themselves. My partner, Officer Chris Navarro, was behind the wheel that night, and I was in the passenger seat nursing a bitter cup of coffee. I'd ridden with Chris for nearly a year by then, and we had that kind of easy, wordless rhythm that only came with time and trust. Dispatch repeated the complaint: "Caller is the property manager. Tenant in Unit 2C. Name's Lucas. Water leaking from his unit for over an hour." No response. Chris glanced at me. "Middle of the night plumbing call. You buying it?" "Not for a second," I muttered. By the time we arrived, a dozen sleepy tenants had already gathered outside. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies on the lawn. Water was flowing down the exterior stairwell in thin rivulets. The landlord was pacing, arms crossed tight across his chest. "He's in there," he said as soon as we got out. "Lucas. He's been strange lately. Talking to himself. Windows covered with tinfoil. Said people were following him. Any history of mental illness?" Chris asked. The landlord shrugged. "He was quiet when he moved in. Paid rent on time. But the last few weeks? Off. Really off." We climbed the stairwell, water sloshing beneath our boots. Chris knocked hard on the door of 2C. "Lucas? Police. You all right in there?" No response. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I nodded, and Chris stepped back and kicked the door open. The force of it sent a wave of water rushing into the hallway. The apartment was a wreck. Furniture was soaked. Every sink, faucet, and shower was running full blast. A garden hose had been snaked through an open window and left gushing across the floor. The air smelled like mildew and rust. Lucas stood in the center of the kitchen. His clothes were drenched. He didn't look at us when we entered, just stood there trembling, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. I approached slowly, hand hovering near my holster. "Lucas?" He flinched. Then turned. "They're in the walls," he whispered. His voice was barely audible over the rush of water. I took another step forward. "Who's in the walls, Lucas?" He shook his head violently. "They whisper. They know my name. They move around when I try to sleep." Chris moved to shut off the water in the bathroom. I stayed with Lucas, keeping my voice low and steady. "In my line of work, you learn how to speak without judgment. What do they want?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just wrapped his arms around himself and began to rock. Chris returned moments later. "You need to see something," he said. I followed him down the hallway into the bedroom. He pointed to a wall beside the closet. At first, I didn't see it, then I did, a faint rectangular seam. Like someone had carved a door into the drywall and then painted over it to hide it. Chris tapped the edge. It sounded hollow. We both backed up, weapons drawn. Chris pried the panel loose with the butt of his flashlight. It swung open with a groan. Inside, 3 people stared back at us, faces pale, eyes wide. Painted symbols in red and black smeared across their cheeks. They were pressed together inside the narrow crawlspace like mannequins stuffed into a case. My breath caught. For a moment, none of us moved. Out, Chris said, his voice a command. They emerged slowly, one by one. Each of them silent. Not confused. Not scared. Just calm. Like they belonged there. We cuffed them. Read them their rights. Took them down the stairs where neighbors watched with horrified disbelief. Lucas was still standing in the kitchen when we returned. Still shaking. Still whispering to himself. The 3 intruders were members of a fringe cult operating out of the woods near the New York border. They called themselves the Veil. Their doctrine revolved around secrecy, submission, and silence. They targeted vulnerable individuals, those on the fringes of society, those easily manipulated. Lucas had met one of them months ago at a free meditation class. From there, they had wormed their way into his life, and then into his home. By the time he realized what was happening, they had already moved into the walls, cutting out the space from behind his closet. They whispered to him. Left strange objects on his pillow. Made him question reality until he snapped. He flooded the apartment because he thought it was the only way to drive them out, and it worked. He was taken to the hospital for evaluation. We learned later that Lucas had struggled with paranoid schizophrenia for years but had managed it well until recently. The betrayal by the people he had trusted pushed him past the edge, but he wasn't crazy, he was trying to protect himself. Chris and I visited him a month later. He was in a residential program, lucid, calm, thankful. He shook my hand and said, "You believed me when no one else would." And I realized in that moment how thin the line is between delusion and danger. Between someone crying for help and someone no one listens to. Sometimes, the monsters in the walls are real, and sometimes, the only thing that separates someone from being another tragedy is that someone else believed them. That night didn't make headlines. There was no shootout. No chase, just a man on the edge, and 3 people hiding in his walls. But for me and Chris, it was one of the most haunting calls we've ever answered, because long after the apartment dried and the crawlspace was sealed, we still hear it sometimes, that silence, and the question that followed, what if we'd never opened that wall? There's a specific type of fear that crawls under your skin when you know you're about to face something unpredictable, something human, but not entirely rational. It was around 3:12 a.m. when I got the call. A report of a woman wandering down Rosewood Lane in northeastern Bergen County, knocking on doors and whispering strange things through doorbell cameras. I was running solo that night. Chris had signed off early due to a family emergency, and I'd been covering our shared route alone. The dispatch, I arrived at the house of the initial caller, a middle-aged man named Frank who met me at his driveway, phone in hand. He didn't say much, just played the Ring camera footage for me. It showed a woman standing silently on his front porch for nearly a full minute, her body motionless, her eyes locked on the lens. Then she leaned forward, pressed the button, and whispered, "She needs blood." Frank had asked her who she meant, but she only laughed, a slow, hiccuping sound that was neither amused nor unhinged but somewhere disturbingly in between. When he threatened to call the police, she tried to tear the camera from the wall. Then she backed away, still facing the camera, slowly stepping off the porch and drifting into the shadows. That was 10 minutes before I arrived. I scanned the street, a quiet residential lane flanked by maple trees and well-manicured lawns. It was the kind of place people move to for peace. But peace is fragile. 2 more units were en route. I radioed for a wider sweep and began checking nearby homes on foot. My flashlight cut through the early morning fog like a razor. For a while, it felt like chasing shadows. Then came the second call. A break-in. 2 blocks east. Same woman. Same behavior, I floored it. By the time I arrived, the other unit had just pulled in behind me. The front door was ajar. The porch light flickered above it, guns drawn. We entered. Police. Announce yourselves. No reply. The foyer was clear, the floor scuffed from recent movement. A sound came from upstairs, not footsteps, not speech, but a low, rhythmic thump. We ascended slowly. At the top of the stairs, a man cracked open the master bedroom door. He looked petrified. She's still here, he whispered. She tried to get in. We barricaded the door. The thumping had stopped. We began clearing rooms. The hallway stretched long and narrow, ending in a child's bedroom. The door was ajar. A light flickered inside, not from a lamp, but from a toy still glowing softly in the dark, and then, a sound I will never forget, a laugh. Soft. Guttural. Uneven. We pushed the door open. She was sitting on the bed, hands in her lap. A large kitchen knife rested against her thigh. Her wrist had been sliced open, blood soaking the sheets beneath her. She looked at me and smiled, not out of joy, but with a sense of possession. She needs blood, she said. Between her knees sat a doll. A porcelain-faced girl with tangled blonde curls. The dress was crimson, soaked in blood that wasn't hers. We raised our weapons, dropped the knife. I commanded. She didn't flinch. Just looked from me to the doll, as if waiting for its approval. Who is she? I asked. The one who needs blood. She speaks to me. She's hungry. I tried stepping forward. We can help you. But you have to let go of the knife. For a moment, I thought she would. Her hand twitched, then she lunged. Not toward the door. Not toward the window, toward me, the knife raised high, blood trailing in the air. I fired twice, both rounds striking her arm. She crumpled to the floor with a shriek that twisted something inside me. Not pain. Not rage. Something ancient and broken. We moved fast. Disarmed her. Cuffed her. Called for medics. Her name was Delilah Cross. 46. She'd been institutionalized multiple times. Her daughter had died in a house fire 10 years earlier. The doll was hers. She had never recovered. Somewhere along the way, her grief had rotted into delusion. She believed her daughter was still speaking to her, from beyond, from within, and that she required blood to stay alive. She'd escaped her facility 3 nights prior. The couple whose house she entered had done everything right. Locked their doors. Stayed upstairs. Called for help. But trauma doesn't care about logic. When I visited them a week later, they were still shaken. The husband had installed new locks. The wife hadn't slept through the night since. I brought them coffee. Sat on their porch for an hour. We didn't talk about Delilah. We talked about what it feels like to be hunted in your own home. Later that month, I was asked to speak at a community forum on crisis response and mental health. I told Delilah's story. Not to shock people, but to remind them that not every person who scares us is a villain. Some are just broken souls waiting for someone to notice their pain. Delilah was ruled not guilty by reason of insanity. She's back in a secure facility now, receiving care. And though I'll never forget the sight of her lunging from that child's bed, what stays with me more is the look in her eyes when she said, "She's hungry." That wasn't a threat. It was a cry. And sometimes, the job isn't about catching the bad guy, it's about standing between two kinds of darkness, the one that harms others, and the one that slowly consumes the person who carries it. Some nights, I still think about her. About the doll. About the way she looked at it like it was alive, and I wonder, if we hadn't found her in time, how many more homes would she have visited, carrying grief like a blade? Across 3 nights that tested every fiber of my training in humanity, I came face to face with the rawest forms of fear, pain, and hope. A woman bleeding in silence. A man haunted by whispers in his walls. A grieving mother spiraling into delusion. Each encounter reminded me that beneath every call for help is a deeper story, one that deserves to be heard, no matter how terrifying or strange it may seem. These weren't just horror stories. They were human stories. And in each, I realized that true strength lies not only in courage under fire, but in empathy when it's hardest to give. The lesson is simple, yet profound: don't dismiss someone's fear just because you don't understand it. Listening, truly listening, can be the first step in saving a life. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who believes in stories that matter. Your support fuels more powerful content like this.